Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little fight review and my final fight analyzation and breakdown of the heavyweight fight that ended up occurring today. And of course, this was a very excellent heavyweight fight between that of Fabio Wardley and Joseph Parker. And this was, I believe, to have the opportunity to fight that of Alexander Usyk for not only his WBO title, but of course for the rest of the belts as well, because I believe that Alexander Usyk is still the complete undisputed champion of the world. But of course, for those of you that did not end up hearing about the results, Fabio Wardley did end up eventually stopping Joseph Parker. I believe it was within the 11th round. Now, just in my personal view, I thought that this stoppage was a terrible stoppage. And I'm not usually one that goes on the record and states that a stoppage was a quote unquote terrible stoppage. But this stoppage, just in my personal view, it's right there with the Rolly Romero, versus what the hell is that one dude's name was? I think his name was Ismail Barrasso or whatever his name was. This stoppage, I mean, it might be a little bit more understandable than that because Parker, of course, obviously was hurt. He was getting hit, to a decent degree, but he was starting to show signs of life, and a lot of those punches were not really landing flush. They were landing on elbows, they were landing on arms. Some, of course, were getting through, but by the time that the referee had stopped the fight, Parker, of course, he threw two punches, he tied him up a little bit, and then, I think he got hit with, maybe one punch, and then after that, he evaded the other one. But in my view, stopping a fight where Alexander Usyk is on the line, and then on top of that, Joseph Parker, obviously he was hurt and, really exhausted, but he did not look hurt enough to me in order to stop this fight. And in my personal view, this was a very bad stoppage, just in my personal view. It's not as bad as, say, probably the Carl Frost versus George Groves first fight stoppage. It's not as bad as that one. That's probably the worst stoppage that I've ever seen. But this stoppage, in my view, was a bad stoppage, just in my personal view. Now, that being stated, overall, once again, Fabio Wardley did end up pulling off this fight, and congratulations to him. I do not think that it was completely on the up and up, but that being stated, he definitely did have his moments in the fight. The fight was pretty much going down how I thought that it was going to go, with Joseph Parker overall, pretty much winning a lot of the rounds. I believe, by the time that Joseph Parker, got stopped in the 11th round or the referee had stopped the fight, I think that I had only Fabio Wardley winning about 3 rounds. Now, certain people, of course, may have him winning a little bit more, but pretty much like I emphasized within my video, I thought that Parker was going to be a little bit too quick and that he was going to have a better jab than that of a Fabio Wardley, or at least overall have a quicker one and be able to maneuver out of the way of jabs a little bit better than that of a Fabio Wardley. And pretty much everything that I was stating in my video, it was basically coming to fruition with Joseph Parker outboxing that of a Fabio Wardley, and Fabio Wardley was wearing down as the fight went along. But the problem was with Joseph Parker is that he was also very clearly starting to wear down as the fight had went along to a certain degree. Now of course that could have been a little bit to Fabio Wardley's body work a little bit early on in the fight, or it also could have been because Joseph Parker apparently came in the heaviest that he's ever been at, or came in a little bit heavier, which in my view is a little bit quizzical because why would you want to come into this fight the heaviest that you've ever been? I would assume that you would want to be, keep that same amount of speed. You already have decent power, and then on top of that, why would you want to possibly tire out in the latter part of the fight where this guy potentially could knock you out at any given moment in time? Has proven overall that he has power that lasts all 12 rounds, no matter how exhausted or how outpointed he's being. To me, Joseph Parker coming in at the heaviest that he's ever been at. I'm not exactly sure what he weighed in at, but I definitely have to assume that that was a part of the reason why Joseph Parker was so exhausted in that of the 11th round, which was a big factor or a part of why he ended up getting stopped by that of the referee within this fight. Now, once again, I do not think that it was a good stoppage. But that being stated, Joseph Parker still put himself in the position to where he looked exhausted and he was getting hit with that great right hand, I believe, which ended up hurting him, which of course put him on the ropes, for a decent amount of time, which possibly could have made the referee say, okay, you know what, he's taking a little bit too many shots. Or the referee was maybe told by Frank Warren or somebody else, look, we really want Fabio Wardley to win this fight. We want him to be the next star to possibly dethrone that of an Usyk, or at least have a big fight with that of Alexander Usyk. So if there is, a potentiality that one fighter is getting hurt, make sure overall that Fabio Wardley, maybe he gets a stoppage overall if you can make it look like a proper stoppage. It's very possible. There are certain things that happen like that behind the scenes. But that being stated, it could have just been that the referee believed that Joseph Parker was just taking too many shots, even if a lot of them were blocked, because he was not returning fire for a certain amount of those shots. But it is what it is. I do think that he did enough, in my view, to stay within the fight. He was clearly up throughout the whole entire fight. I thought that he was up by several rounds, and I thought that it was nowhere near enough, just in my view, to stop the fight truly. But it is what it is. But that being stated, overall, Fabio Wardley, he gets his title shot next, I believe, against that of an Alexander Usyk. Do I believe that he will beat an Alexander Usyk? Not at all. I don't think that either of these fighters really have a fantastic chance to beat that of an Alexander Usyk. But Fabio Wardley pretty much showed me all the faults that I thought were in his style. He's not someone that moves his head very well. He moves it to a certain degree, but he keeps his hands down too low even when he does move it, which causes him to get hit with a very good jab and hit with other punches in return. He's got great heart and great will and never gives up on himself, so you have to give the man a great amount of credit for that, because he definitely was down within this fight, but he's just someone that has a lot of technical flaws. He does not have good enough head movement. He does not have great stamina, especially down the stretch. He's not someone overall, once again, that is the most defensively sound fighter. He has a lot of flaws. Now, does he have a chance against Usyk? He might have a chance, especially because, he's not the worst boxer I've ever seen. He is someone that does have some technical, prowess to a degree, but he's just not someone that is a technically excellent fighter. He does have a very decent jab and a very great right hand, of course, but he's someone, in my view, that can be a little bit too repetitive. He can be a little bit too predictable in that of his style, and he's someone that just gets hit way, way, way too often. And Alexander Usyk is someone that does not tire. Usyk is someone that, even at this age, it's hard for me to see him tiring, at least after his most recent performances. And I think that he will go down to the body enough, and I think that he also will hit Fabio Wardley enough and move around Fabio Wardley enough to the point to where Wardley will also gas himself out just by reacting to Alexander Usyk's movements. If Usyk, of course, is still at a prime form in his career, because he does look like he's slowly aging. But that being stated, I thought that Joseph Parker was winning the majority of the rounds. I thought that his jab was the quicker jab, that it was the more educated of the two. I think that Fabio Wardley still got a great amount of jabs in there, but I thought that, he was just getting hit a little bit too much, which once again did not surprise me. He keeps his hands down very, very low. And he's someone that, did show us that not only in his last fight, but also in this fight, that he does have a little bit of a stamina issue. But Joseph Parker, as I also stated in certain times, he also has a little bit of a stamina issue as well, a little bit later on down in the fight. So, of course, that ended up proving to be somewhat of his downfall. So, we'll see what ends up happening. We'll see if there's a rematch, but for Fabio Wardley, I doubt that he's going to take an immediate rematch. Why would you really want to take an immediate rematch with a guy that you pretty much were losing almost the whole entire fight to? I only had Wardley winning about 3 rounds before the round, and then you possibly lose the title opportunity against that of an Alexander Usyk. It just wouldn't make any sense. It's obvious that the next step for Fabio Wardley would be to fight that of an Alexander Usyk. Now, what is next for Joseph Parker? I'm not really quite sure. We'll see what ends up happening. He is only 33 years of age from what I learned, but he's also someone that's had a lot of fights. I believe now he has 40 total fights in his career, and he's dealt with the damage of the Joe Joyce fights. He's dealt the damage of the Dillian White fight. He's dealt the damage of this fight. He's dealt the damage of, the Zhang fight. So Joseph Parker, in order to get that possible opportunity against that of an Alexander Usyk, he's going to have to defeat someone else, or, possibly maybe Usyk will give him an opportunity, but I'm not quite sure, because Usyk already seemed not super interested in giving Joseph Parker a certain opportunity. And I think that, if Usyk was going to pick one that he wanted to win in this fight, it probably would have been Wardley, because he's made a lot of money off of fighting some of Britain's biggest stars, and Wardley is the younger guy. It makes more sense for him to win this fight than what it does an older Joseph Parker that probably will not have much more value for the next few years. But if Wardley ends up undefeated, possibly even beating that of an Alexander Usyk, they can create a mega fight between that of, that of a Fabio Wardley and that possibly of a Moses Itama over the next couple of years. So, as I stated, Joseph Parker was going to have to be very careful within this fight, because there was a possibility, because he is the older guy, he is the guy that they're probably looking to phase out over the next few years. That if Wardley has an opportunity, whether A, the fight is too close, or there might be a stoppage aboard, that Joseph Parker may just lose this fight, and that's exactly what happened. Now, I did not think that Parker was going to gas out that much in the latter part of the fight, but I also was not aware overall that he gained the weight that he did until I believe today. So that is also a factor that I probably could have looked at. Either way, I would have not assumed that, the fight would have been stopped in the 11th round. I would have probably predicted that Joseph Parker would have had enough to finish the fight, and I think that he did have enough to finish the fight. But it's obvious that there was a little bit, overall of there's a little bit extra behind that situation. And I wouldn't be surprised if Frank Warren or one of those guys stated, look, Fabio Wardley is the next big thing. Joseph Parker's a guy that has been there and done that. If you can possibly give Fabio a little bit of the advantage, then it would be highly appreciated, or you might find a couple of extra zeros on that payment check. So, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. But that being said, and congratulations to Fabio Wardley. I do think that he was losing the whole entire fight, and I thought that it was a very early stoppage, just in my personal view. But that being stated, overall, congratulations to Fabio Wardley. He is overall a very dangerous contender. He's not someone that, of course, always gets it done in the most beautiful or pretty of ways. He's not someone overall that always gets things done in the most technical of fashions, but he is someone overall that does have some technical prowess. He's very dangerous. He has great belief in himself, and he has power, no matter how tired he is, that can last throughout the full 12 rounds. So I have to give Wardley overall a certain amount of credit for that. I do not think that, overall he would probably beat Joseph Parker in an immediate rematch, although I could be wrong, but I don't see that happen. So we'll see. But once again, the next big step for that of Fabio Wardley would be that for Alexander Usyk, and we'll see what he can do. Of course, is he anywhere near as technical or as complete as an Alexander Usyk? No, of course not. But he is someone that's going to be bigger, potentially stronger, and he is going to face Usyk that is a little bit older another year. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But it will be a very entertaining fight because Fabio Wardley is a legit A-grade level fighter for the heavyweight division. I don't think that he's quite as good as some of the contenders that Usyk could fight, say as that, probably of a Joseph Parker potentially. I don't think that he's quite as good as, say, definitely not as good as a Moses Itama. And I also don't believe he's as good as a Ajit Kabayel. But he's still a clear A-grade level opponent, and he's someone that could potentially give Usyk a problem, especially if he lands the right punch against Usyk. We'll see. We'll see. But, it'll be an entertaining fight. I would love to honestly see a rematch between these two. But, I understand Wardley is not going to give up that title opportunity. He would be very dumb to do that. So it just makes no sense. But that being stated, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. And I'm sure I'll talk about this a little bit later. But congratulations to Mr. Fabio Wardley. Once again, I do think the stoppage was early, but good on him. As for Joseph Parker, I'm not really quite sure where he goes from here. He could maybe get a rematch with Wardley after the Alexander Usyk fight. Maybe he could fight somebody else. But it might be getting very, very close to the end of the line for a Joseph Parker. Because who really are you going to fight next to possibly get the Alexander Usyk title opportunity? Joseph Parker, of course, has been on a very good streak. But if we're also going to talk about it, some of the opponents that he has fought as of recent, they have had bigger names. But they also have been kind of, maybe not at the best points in their career. Martin McCauley was literally on like 2 days' notice, and he was 30 pounds overweight. When you talk about Deontay Wilder, Wilder was still the favorite to win that fight, but he was never quite the same after Tyson Fury had beat him on a couple of occasions. And then, of course, I believe he also defeated David Zhang, who was probably, the best form opponent that he beat as of recent. But the thing is now is that he's going to have to potentially beat Wardley in a rematch or beat somebody else or possibly even face someone like a Ajit Kabayel in order to get that Alexander Usyk rematch. Alexander Usyk match. And I don't know if I see him beating any of those guys. So unfortunately for Joseph Parker, although I do think it was somewhat taken away from him, I just don't know if he's any more going to get that Alexander Usyk title shot. I hope he does because I think he's someone deserved it, and it's a fight that I would love to see Usyk take because Parker is still one of the top guys in the world. But that being stated, Fabio Wardley is going to get his shot, and I do think that it is going to be a very big fight, and I think that British fans, as well as boxing fans alike, are going to be somewhat excited for it, especially because a certain amount of people may believe that Joseph Parker kind of got a little bit screwed over in this fight. So they may want to see Usyk somewhat take it out, on Fabio Wardley or get Parker's revenge for him, but we'll see. And it's also big because Wardley is a young, undefeated power puncher that does have some technical ability. So we'll see. With that being stated, thank you all so much for watching. We'll see where this goes, and I'll talk to you all later.